So we're going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm the ilk that says you should start on time, you should stop on time, and you don't benefit the people who are late at the expense of the people who are on time. And so those who are late, we're just going to talk about them while they get here. Okay, is that cool? So my name's Niels Johnson. I'm a technical evangelist for Symantec. I'm not going to try to sell you anything over the course of the morning. This is going to be afternoon, whatever time frame. I was in Toronto this week, so I have no idea what time it is. And that's all you're going to get about me. I'd rather talk about stuff. But I have two new friends. This is Laurie and Dan. They work for the state of California. I'm going to give them an opportunity. Oh, we've decided that over the course of 45 minutes, we're going to solve all of your security problems along with world hunger. So we've got a lot to do. We've got a lot to cover. So this is Laurie. I'm sorry?
Silence your devices.
Oh, yeah. Turn off your phones. Actually, if your phone goes off, I get to answer it. How's that? That fair? You're not going to want that to happen. Totally not going to want that to happen. So, Laurie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Laurie Rhea. I am the Privacy and Disclosure Officer at Franchise Tax Board. So I'm here to talk about privacy is the why.
There you go. All right. And Daniel?
I'm Dan Manson. I'm Professor, Department Chair, Computer Information Systems at Cal Poly Pomona. I've also served as the Campus Information Security Officer, Center for Information Assurance at Cal Poly.
Cool. So our program this afternoon is going to look like this. I'm going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes sort of doing the privacy is why bit, what it is we need to be looking out for, perhaps make some forward-looking statements about what the risk landscape looks like, and then I'm going to step away from being in that presentation mode, and we're going to do sort of a panel thing. We'd like to take questions that you might have, and then if you I've got a couple ringer questions to ask them, but we would rather hear your questions per se. So let me kind of set the table here and talk about the risk landscape. I want to talk about this person right here and what it is that we're actually trying to accomplish. And it looks like this. It really makes no difference what the label is of the person on the other end of this hand. The truth is that every person that touches any pane of glass that tries to tap into the information systems on your side of the pane of glass have the same attributes. That could be a customer, supplier, partner, vendor, employee of the state of California, a citizen within the state of California, or Jerry Brown. Doesn't make any difference who it is. They all have the same expectations. And in this day, you have the same expectations as well. Today, the lowest common denominator is we're all just a whole bunch of egomaniacs. And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but the truth is, you tell me if I'm wrong, when you touch that pane of glass, when you touch this pane of glass right here, it's all about me and my stuff. And my expectations are that you as IT are going to deliver my stuff to this pane of glass, and frankly, my stuff, your stuff, comes in two flavors, the professional me and the personal me. And I really don't care about those two flavors. All I know is it's your job to deliver my stuff to the other side of this pane of glass, please. And if you could do it quickly, that would be really, really cool. Now the problem is, there's no reason why that can't happen. In this day, the technology's in place. The problem is, all the people on this side of the pane of glass, that would be us, we have to struggle with that tension between security and availability. Getting that stuff to them, not a problem, but keeping it secure when they do, that is a problem. So for a working definition, we're going to talk about risk as being that tension between making stuff secure, which limits availability, or making stuff available, which limits your security, and the tension between those two. So what does that look like? I'm going to use 5 different sort of subparts to talk about that risk. First, it's about the infrastructure, yes. And now we're talking about the traditional, old guard, historic kind of security stuff. Antivirus and intrusion detection and firewall and vulnerability assessment, all that junk. Truth is, you got to have it. But today, if our security processes are based on the infrastructure, you're running well behind the curve, because today it is so not about the infrastructure. Today, it's about the information sitting on and passing through that infrastructure. I'm going to throw a couple metrics at you as we're going through here. Gartner Group now says that 71% of an organization's intellectual property now resides in email archives. 71% of the really important stuff is accessible by a device that looks like this, that may or may not pass through the critical systems of your infrastructure. Where is your infrastructure if this is the critical endpoint? And the answer is, today I have to consider the security of that information regardless of where it's found, and it's all about the information, it's not about the infrastructure. It's about response, and we're going to put some sublabels on there. It's about disaster recovery and business continuity. I have a huge strategic question for you. You work for the state of California, so I don't know exactly how it is you define success. But however you define success, whether it's accessibility, whether it's whatever, yeah, definition of success, how long can you afford to be offline before you become unsuccessful? When the success clock on your wall stops, out there pretty soon the second hand is going to sweep past a mark on that clock where your definition of success has just been exploited. Do you know how long you can afford to be offline? And then you absolutely have to be drop dead sure that your disaster recovery and business continuity processes can put you back online in n-1 increment. If it's 5 days, you're back in 4 days. If it's 19 minutes, you're back in 18 minutes. If it's 6 microseconds, you're back in 5 microseconds. And depending on where you are as far as the state's infrastructure is concerned, any one of those time frames might be true. Do you know that? And if you could test that and validate that without impacting production, that'd be a really good thing. People. Wouldn't it be so cool if we could do this whole security thing without any people involved? You know, the problem with people, 3 strikes. By default, people bring with them 3 strikes. 1, they're inefficient. 2, they're ineffective. 3, they are error prone. And I mean with a capital E, capital P, error prone. Anything we might do to automate processes to eliminate people from either the availability side or the security side would be a really good thing. And then lastly, the technology trends. And the technology trends, what do those things look like? Well, first, I have a personal biased opinion. Virtualization does not belong on a technology trend slide because virtually now everything is virtualized. I say that sort of philosophically, but the truth is virtualization isn't a trend anymore. It's like the way we do business. But let me talk about a couple of other, let me see where this goes. Yeah, let's talk about the threat landscape. Outside at the Symantec booth is a device, and the first 6 of you to get there are going to get one of these. We have a hard copy of a device called the ISTR. That's the Internet Security Threat Report. You might want to be the first one back to the table with my colleague from Symantec. If you don't get a hard copy, you can download a PDF file from our website at symantec.com. It's a document that basically describes the threat landscape. There's nothing at the end that says you have to buy a firewall. No salesperson will call. A couple of metrics from that Internet Security Threat Report. From the days of Michelangelo, the virus, not the Sistine Chapel painter. You remember when you used to worry about leaving floppy disks in the A drive? You remember those days? Do you remember the A drive? Okay, now we're good. Now we're good. Retirement looms large, doesn't it? Okay, so from the days of Michelangelo through 2011, Symantec wrote 225 million virus definitions. 2012, we wrote 240 million virus definitions. This year, we're going to write over 1 million virus definitions a day, close to 400 million this year. There's no way on God's green earth I can look you in the eye as a purveyor of antivirus and tell you I can deliver 1 million virus defs a day. I don't care whose management console you're running to distribute that out into the far reaches of your infrastructure and have typical scanning technologies scan and keep you protected using those antiquated, and I use that word very decidedly, technologies, and say that you would be secure. I would be lying to you. Today, it is not about descriptor or definition-based technologies. Today, in that report, it will tell you that in 2012, the security industry as a whole surfaced 5,291 new potentially exploitable vulnerabilities. 5,291 new holes in operating systems, applications, and hardware platforms. You do the math, that's more than 100 a week, 14 to 15 a day. Do not answer this next question. Did you know that? And if you have to answer no, it's the strongest illustration I have for the need of what I call a knowledge component that sits behind all of your technologies. regardless of who you're dependent upon for the security of your infrastructure, if they can't deliver real-time and or preventive or preemptive technology or knowledge to keep that technology up to date, speeds and feeds and bells and whistles are ridiculous to even talk about. Today, it's about having technology that can respond to a knowledge component. Data growth. Gartner now says that the average SMB, the average small to medium business, of which I'm going to suggest all of you represent one, not the state of California, that's an enterprise, but within each of your departments, your data is probably growing somewhere in the neighborhood of 62% year over year. Let me tell you what that means. It's not a law really, it's more like a mathematical anomaly. If you've ever been enrolled in real estate or investing, there's this thing they call the law of 72. And I can't go beyond camera. No, he's moving it, good. I don't work for the state, so I'm gonna do any darn thing I want. Okay, anyway, so the law of 72 says you can take any percentile you want and divide it into the number 72, and the number you get back is the amount of time it's going to take for your original number to double in size. Let's do something conservative. Let's take 50% year-over-year data growth and divide it into 75. What do you get? 1.5, 18 months. The average SMB, your organization is going to double the size of its data over the course of the next 18 months. And that metric all by itself is why the adoption of cloud computing is not a consideration. It's not something we're thinking about tomorrow. It has to be on the strategic plate. Now, that opens a huge can of worms for a lot of us. I got to know that my cloud service provider can stand up to all my security, my requirements, my compliance requirements, all that stuff. But big data, or cloud computing, is here. The bad guys, I said, are getting more and more and more problematic. What we're now seeing, what Symantec is seeing, as the rest of the industry is seeing, is the bad guys will now take their development cycles, their development staff, and break them up into 5 different groups. One group does nothing but write code to find targets. That's all they do. Go out and find targets of value. They pass that information on to the incursion team, who will typically find one of those potentially exploitable vulnerabilities and use it to bore a hole in that target. Once that hole is in place, they pass it off to the discovery team, and they're responsible for going through that hole and finding where the actual assets are and marking them. The capturing team will go in and either encapsulate that thing with a marker to say, hey, it's ready to go, or to move it off to some obscure server somewhere, and the exfiltration team, depending on their modus operandi, will either go in and grab that thing and pull it back out through the hole like a bull in a china closet because they don't care how much noise they've made. 2, they will drive a tap into it like a keg of beer and just bleed it because it's the gift that keeps on giving. Or if they are socio-politically oriented, they will simply destroy the asset by overriding it with ones and zeros until Jesus comes. Depending on what they want to do, those 5 different sets of coding requires more than just your father's antivirus business. It's not about antivirus anymore. It's not about intrusion detection anymore. Today, technologies have to work in concert with each other to deal with those various capabilities as far as the bad guys are concerned. And if there's not some measure of integration within the course of all that, you are woefully behind the curve as far as where those folks are going. Now then, that's where we are as far as the trends are today. It's a little bit of enlightenment. Let's talk about tomorrow. Well, what is tomorrow? What should I be considering as far as what tomorrow looks like? And I have to be honest with you, I'm going to answer that, but I have no validation, I have no background, I have no reference. This thought came out of the back of my head, and it's a really scary place in there. Every now and then something comes out. My mom does a rosary on a regular basis. Never mind, that's a whole different topic, okay? The whole point is that I'm going to tell you what I think the issues of tomorrow are going to be. Okay? I think the issues of tomorrow is all about data mining. And let me tell you why I think that. I think today, data mining is only in its infancy. The algorithms that we're running to do analytics on this, we're only figuring out that we can. I won't go into Cisco's Internet of Everything. Or that data is just being generated at huge. Once we figure out how to disseminate this and turn it into that, newsflash, there's the same amount of gold in this picture as there is in that picture. And today, I've got bad guys who are knocking themselves out to get to this. What happens when we start running it through data mining, refining processes, and now there's repositories sitting on your servers and in your data centers that look like that? What happens to your newfound security parameters then? What happens to authorization and authentication then? What happens to your disaster recovery and business continuity policies then? What happens to the compliance documents that we've all come to rely on then? And I would suggest when data mining comes to fruition, the way you and I think about security is going to be turned literally on its end. We need to rethink how we think about security. So what does an information-centric enterprise look like? What do I need to be doing? First, I hate to say this, but yep, it's about the infrastructure. And for our conversation today, it makes no difference what that infrastructure looks like. Infrastructure is built upon. Physical, virtual, mobile, cloud makes no difference. In order to keep this thing secure, I've got to have security in place. I've got to manage the endpoints correctly. I've got to be able to back up not only the macrocosm, but the microcosms, those endpoints with intellectual property sitting on them. I've got to manage my storage because it's growing 62% year over year, and I've got to make sure the stuff is available so the refresh rates when the glass is touched are pretty darn high. But once that's in place, then some magic happens. Then I can talk about intelligence. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. What would happen if once I know where everything is, if I could classify the data? And frankly, in this day, personal biased opinion, I think data classification is huge. Why? Because it allows me to understand what is important and what's not important. I have a good friend in San Angelo, Texas, and his adage to me is you don't put a $10 fence around a $5 horse. And we see all of our horses as being $10 horses when they're really not. Why are we treating all data the same? And frankly, we shouldn't. Have you ever thought about having a conversation with your security provider about all the stuff you don't need to buy? And the topic of that conversation is risk tolerance. All data does not need to be addressed the same. We talked about threats. Encryption. Today, encryption has to be a part of your security. All data in the clear is vulnerable. If I can read it in English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, or anything double byte character string enabled, it's in the clear and it is going to be attacked. Encryption has to be a part of the equation up and down the entire stack. Parentheses and disclaimer. 10 days ago, there's an article that says the NSA, using a supercomputer, has just cracked the algorithm that RSA uses to encrypt. Seriously? Yeah, the NSA can now read anything encrypted by the RSA's encryption algorithm. He stops, he pauses, and he says, what's the technical difference between the supercomputer sitting at the NSA and the botnet of 10,000 bots owned by some bot herder somewhere? And the technical difference is nada, baby, nada. Those are exactly the same thing. The difference is in the coding. The NSA has already thought through the coding process of cracking that encryption algorithm, and the bad guys, I will bet you dollars to no nuts, are already bringing people on board to start working towards that. In 18 months, this is my forward-looking statement, in 18 months, we're going to hear more and more and more about encryption algorithms being cracked. In 18 months, encryption is going to be a critical part of your security story, but only as a defense in depth philosophic. Today, it's a must-have because all data in the clear. In 18 months, it's going to be part of your defense in depth story. It's like the typical bad guy walks into a neighborhood and starts checking front doors, and this one's locked, and this one's locked, and this one's locked, and there's one that's unencrypted. And in I'm going to go. Okay? Ownership, who owns the stuff? That allows me to understand shelf life and $5 horses and $10 horses and e-discovery. We're in a litigious society, so sooner or later you're going to have to go in there and discover this stuff. That's all cool. And here's where life gets to be really cool. In governance, if I've got the data classified, I can impose policy on that data. If I know what's important and what's not, I can impose policy on that data. So what actually happens to it when the pane of glass it's touched can be manipulated. If it's really important stuff, I could have it so it shows up on the pane of glass, and that's all. And policy says, thou shalt not pass it off to a thumb drive. Thou shalt not attach it to an email. Thou shalt not even send it to a printer in hard copy. Thou shalt not, and oh, by the way, there's policy set up where you get to read that for 90 seconds. And if you can't read, first you need to go back to the second grade and start all over, but we're going to give you a 90-second window, and then it's going to go away from here. That's a very strong policy, but it can happen. That's the way you can set it up. So I can impose policy on the information once it's classified. That eliminates about 33% of the people factor. And then, with good authentication and authorization, if I know what their credentials are, I know who they are, I know where to allow them to go, I can automatically impose my will as IT upon the data and upon the people, and I've just solved 2/3 of the people factor. Strong authentication and authorization, critical in this day. Let me go back and do compliance. I said there's 5,291 new potentially exploitable vulnerabilities that surfaced last year. I have not read all of them, but every compliance document I've said, of every compliance document I've said, none of them say, thou shalt fix that potentially exploitable vulnerability. None of them say that. But they all say, you darn sure better be aware of the fact you have one in your environment. You better know how many iterations of that thing you have in your environment, and if you have an outside third-party source that can tell you what the probability is of that being exploited, if the probability is low enough, you can use that as your rationale for not fixing the hole. With 14 or 15 a day, if you don't even know that the vulnerability is there, I would suggest the distance between you and compliance is getting larger and larger and larger every day, and we haven't even talked about the security implications, parentheses. 80% of the attacks that occur would not have happened if the individuals who were attacked had simply kept their patch levels up to date. Keeping your patch levels up to date is a part of those compliance requirements, close parentheses. Remediation, obviously fixing that is cool. If I had an organization that had some sort of automated tool that could do that, cool, and then obviously I need some reporting to keep myself out of jail. So there we go. Now that's my presentation. That's what we call an information-centric model. I don't know how long that took. I did that in a world record. That was 20 minutes. I don't do that presentation in 20 minutes. I'm just saying. I'm calling mom. Okay, so I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So with that sort of model in mind, we want to take the remainder of our time together, which is about 35, 40 minutes or so, and take your questions for my colleagues primarily around this, because I've just given, the whole combination plate is out there for me. I got nothing left. I got nothing else to say. So we'd like your questions regarding security, privacy, world hunger, whatever, wherever you want to go. What kind of questions do you have regarding any of those security components, technologies, for my illustrative colleagues here? Yes?
Why would you recommend the best encryption tool?
Oh, I'm not wearing my shirt. You know what? I think in this day, no, he stops, he pauses, and he says, so what would you, I so want to answer that question. So what?
Please
what,
do.
No. Tell me about your encryption methodologies and the kinds of attributes. We don't mention any labels here. Symantec. We don't want to mention any labels here by any stretch of the imagination, but what kind of functionality, what kind of attributes would you be looking for at an encryption tool if you're going to?
Cost effective. Encryption will cost you. It will cost you in terms of the cost of the encryption product. It will cost you in terms of the time of implementing it. It will cost you in terms of training people to use it. A few years ago, we looked into having full hard disk encryptions on laptops. And we decided not to go to it because we couldn't make the cost justification for it. Encryption is really worth using. But you want to make sure that you're doing a great cost-benefit analysis on it, and is the data that you're trying to encrypt, does it have enough value to justify what you're going to spend?
And in our environment, we do encrypt every laptop. So we don't deploy a laptop unless it's got full encryption on it. And I think that's, as a state standard, that's what we're bound to, is to encrypt a mobile device. In our organization, because we're dealing with sensitive information of taxpayers, in addition to federal tax information, a lot of PII, it is absolutely critical that we encrypt all those mobile devices. We have, thumb drives that we encrypt and give to our auditors, for example. We have laptops that are all encrypted. I think the challenge comes when we get into the other devices, right? We talk about, and then we talked about this in a couple sessions earlier in this symposium. When you're talking about allowing people to bring their own, Then how do you go forward with it? So that's, as far as encryption goes, we encrypt all of our laptops.
It also, I think, may become a compliance issue for us. I was in a presentation that Joe McNabb and Michelle Robinson gave on updates on the breach laws, where we're going with that, and I really think we're going to see legislation that's going to say if you're sending data in transit, it must be encrypted. I think that's a direction we're going in.
Okay, yes.
So given the 20-minute diatribe, right, and the
Wow.
landscape of where we're at, I'm curious what the panel's thoughts are after hearing that. How are you approaching it? How does it differ? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with?
In terms of what the landscape looks like, when I think about threat and risk, from my perspective as the privacy officer, I have to think about how am I, and I'm not a technologist, I am not into our information security technologies. There certainly are people here who are, but it's not me. So when I'm thinking about what the threat landscape looks like, I'm thinking about how can I make an impact on that from the privacy perspective. I'm talking about people, processes, right? Policies. You develop strong policies, and this gets up to that governance layer. Then you measure the compliance with those policies. You train people on what those policies are. If you don't have a strong policy in place that you can enforce and you can train on, then whatever the threat is, you're going to be susceptible to it. So it doesn't even really matter what the threat landscape looks like. Whatever that threat is, if you can't train your people to follow the policy that you have in order to mitigate the risk of that threat, you're susceptible.
I think one of the most important things to do is to understand risk. It's a word I love to use when I'm teaching our students. There are 3 things you can do with risk, and one that you should not do, but we do a lot. We can mitigate risk, we can transfer risk, we can accept risk, which is perfectly acceptable. I tell students management can make a decision to accept whatever level of risk they want. What we should not do, but what we tend to do too much when we're not thinking, is ignore risk. So in order to avoid ignoring risk, we have to know what risk we have. A document that I really am glad we have at Cal Poly is an information classification handling standard, where we divided the data that we have in Cal Poly in terms of 3 levels of protection: confidential, internal use, and public. And as Niall said, you can't look at all data the same. You have limited budget, and there is data that is much more valuable and that it has to be protected much more than other data. So this document with 3 levels gives us a simple way to look at it that way. I really agree with the point that Niall's made on data, where we're going with big data. But in order to protect our data, we're going to have to understand its value. And organizations, I think, need to spend more time knowing what the value is.
Yes.
For a data center, we have over 600 customers, and we cannot get our customers to classify their data. So how do you go about that if they don't even know what their data is worth?
Did you hear that? They have a data center. Correct me if I'm wrong. They have a data center, 600 customers, and at this juncture, they're having a difficulty, if not it's impossible, to get them to classify the data as it's being done.
Who's liable? You or the customer? I mean, it's not something that you can really do, but it's something maybe you can help educate the customer and provide best practices for. I mean, do the customers care?
Yep.
Speaking of data classification, you get into an interesting thing relative to ownership as you start aggregating data in databases and take siloed systems and put them into integrated systems. The ownership becomes somewhat blurred. How do you help navigate through that?
It's not something for, I don't know.
I would speak to that from the perspective of our organization. We are we are embarking upon some really strong enterprise data management concepts and governance policies, if you will. And one of those is data ownership. And the policy basically says that the enterprise owns the data and that the main user, if you will, or the data steward is listed and identified, and then the data steward becomes almost as responsible as the owner. Mm-hmm. So it's defining your data governance, I think. Mm-hmm.
Right. This document was created by our IT governance group. And in the IT governance group, we have data owners, not just the data custodians, not the traditional people that you look at and say you're responsible. So it's critical that you have the owners of the data involved in this process and doing their job, because they're the ones who really know the value.
And let me just muddy the waters a little more there. I know this is not going to be very helpful, but we also need to differentiate between data authorship and data ownership, because those are not necessarily the same thing. Just because my name is on the spreadsheet or my name is on that block of data doesn't necessarily mean I own the data. Over the course of time, that ownership can shift from one person to another. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if I may, a follow-up question. One of the things that
We don't do follow-up questions here. Next, please. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
I should be characterized. One of the things also that I've been kind of, working my way through is big data. And you get into what I call the aggregation issue. And what happens is I can take data from perhaps two different sources, ownerships, whatever. I can combine it, and now I've created something that potentially has a different classification. I don't have to give an example, it's obvious. But also I've created a derivative piece of data. Do I own that derivative data? If I store that derivative data and then run ad hoc queries, 10 or 20 times, do each one of those become derivative data? And do I own all those? Or, trying to work my way through that.
Yeah, good questions.
It is good.
So let me speak philosophically. I think, frankly, the answer to your question is yes. It's about how the policy reads as far as whose is what and what is yours and what's not. Is it a case of what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable? And frankly, I think the whole concept of data management needs to go through a rethink as we're developing these repositories of big data before we begin to refine them with the data mining components. So, another question? Come on.
So I'd like to follow up on your question, because I've been starting to catch up on SB 46. 10 years ago, when I was ISO, our student ID was a social security number. Now it's not. Now it's something that we thought was safe and could be public, so it's level 3 here. It's called the Bronco ID number, unique identifier. But with SB 46, do we have to start protecting usernames? Does that become something of more value than we thought? So I'd like to throw that out to the audience.
Don't look at me.
Come on, no guts, no glory. Come on. Yep.
Most of us know that policies will not be read by the employees. So I'm asking for your privacy best practices in your CSM governance.
So we have very, very strict, strong requirements for all of our users at Franchise Tax Board that they have to go through an annual training program. And this annual training component contains all of those policies around what's acceptable use, what's an incompatible activity, what does the confidentiality statement contain? Are you aware of all the penalties and the policies that apply? Do you know about our mobile device policies? And the user actually has to go through this web-based module, and they are then certifying that they know all these policies, that they get it, that they've read them, that they agree to them, and that they understand them. That's registered, in our automated online learning management system, and then we can hold them to that because they have certified. We also make those available, of course, to all the users online, and they can go get them anytime they want. But it is something that legally stands up to an action, for example. If the user goes through this training module and they assert to understanding all of these policies, they're held to it. And so it goes back to that same thing, people. That's where the problem is. That's where your issues are going to come, and it's a matter of putting some really strong education, training, and then checking those policies, the compliance with those policies. Does that help?
Follow-up, if I may. So you have annual training, and your metrics say you have 100% of completion of the training. Does it change the employee behavior in terms of privacy, security? Does it really up to date with all the latest hacks or compromise?
I'll go ahead and then.
Yeah, I have a comment on that.
Okay. For us, we do update it every year. We do monitor so that we end up with 100% compliance. So does it ensure that it meets every single possible, nth degree of policy and penalty? We hope that it does. We're held to a pretty high standard by the IRS in addition to our state requirements. So we have to not only meet the state requirements for training and all those things, but we also have to meet the federal requirements, so because we get so much federal data. So I would say, yes, we get 100% compliance because we pound on them and cut off their access if they don't complete it. Yes, we update it every year to ensure that all the new laws are covered. What was the other thing that you mentioned?
Does it change behavior?
Oh, I think that since we have been really tracking numbers of cases, I think that, we still have people who do the wrong thing. Again, it's back to that people factor. It always goes back to the people. You can train people. In addition to this annual training component, we do role-based training, provide it to individual groups and units and business areas. We do security campaigns, constant articles and tips about security and requirements and how to protect yourself and how to protect the organization. There's always going to be that percentage of people who are nosy, who don't follow the policy or the rule. And so I think it does impact behavior, but I think there's still always going to be that certain component of your employee or of your organization that doesn't follow it. So does it impact behavior? I think it does. Is it 100% fail-safe? No.
Dan?
How many of you have heard of a company called Wambach? Wambach, W-O-M, raise your hand if you have. I see a nod. Raise your hand if you've heard of Wambach Technologies. That's amazing. That's amazing. So we teach a personal cyber wellness class, entry-level class, where we try and do basic security awareness. And we have a site license for Wambach. They created a phishing game, Phil and Phyllis, where you can learn about phishing in a very fun and entertaining way. But along with the license, we have the capability to launch phishing attacks within our organization and measure who responds to them. So back to your point, does behavior change? If you really want to go down that road, I would strongly encourage you to check out Wambach and try out their license. I don't work for them or anything like that, but for measurement, because it's something I've wanted to do in our organization, I just haven't convinced them to do it yet. Because you can actually do phishing attacks within your organization and collect all the data. Basically, your own IT group is doing a phishing attack to see what people do. That would be a way to measure behavior, and over time, measure behavior change.
I might also add that I don't know about all, but a number of the DLP technologies, data loss protection technologies, have policy written into them, where if your end user does something inappropriate, moves, opens, looks at, what they're going to get is a screen that by your device, by your design says, hey, you really shouldn't be looking at this. Are you sure you want to do that? Or, click yes and they get it. Or, hey, if you go any farther in this, we're going to show you the sign over the door that says exit. What I'm saying is the DLP technologies, frankly, can do that monitoring. And every time that end user, when that end user experiences that sort of stick as opposed to a carrot, we have seen the negative activity diminish significantly over the course of time throughout the organization. When they sometimes it's just, you'll excuse my saying so, they are very inquisitive, rightly or wrongly motivated. It's just I was just looking, really, whatever. The whole point is they didn't know they weren't supposed to do that, regardless of I've taken my annual checkbox thing. But the whole point is that there are technologies perhaps already in your environment that can give them that stick experience where the positive activity will be encouraged and the negative activity will be discouraged. I would suggest you simply go back and take a look at the possibilities you already have in-house.
And getting to that DLP issue, we have a DLP product in-house that we look at email. Mm-hmm. And we have a requirement, for example, not to send out any federal tax information, right? You can't put federal tax information in email. And we quarantine it, it gets stopped, and the user gets a message that says, it appears that this email contains federal tax information. If you really think you need to send it, contact the disclosure office. Mm-hmm. We don't ever have anybody contact us. So we have, very rarely, once in a great while, does somebody call and say, oh gosh, I really do need to send that email, and I really do need it to contain FTI. Mm-hmm. They're not doing that. So the behavior is changing, and I didn't even think of the link to the DLP, but that is changing.
Did we mention the fact that people are error prone? Did I say that?
Yeah.
Have we said that more than 3 times? Because it's important for us to, there's a question in the back.
Actually, that answered it. My question was in reference to DLP, and since you have technology in place, some people don't have technology in place, and you told us the threat landscape is 71% of intellectual property, or in this case, PII, is an email. Mm-hmm. So how do you change the way business is done in the organization? We're so reliant on email, and we're using it as a storage place, as an artifact, and we shouldn't. But that's a business function that we're just not used to. It's so hard to change how we approach that.
Yeah. We realize that the reality is there are business areas that are using internal email to move stuff around, and it's probably not the best practice. So again, we educate, we continue to say, here's another option. We go out to business areas and talk with them about their processes and try to, okay, can we modify this process so that it is a more secure method? Can we move away from the email? The really scary thing about email, it becomes when you talk about having a centralized, for example, a statewide email system, right? If we've got tax information going around in email, and one day our email system is now hosted and managed and lives someplace else, there goes all that tax information now to this other organization. That's just not acceptable for us. So it was really important for us to understand our business processes and to work with our business areas to find the best solution, and talk about re-engineering the business if that's what it takes. But that's a really difficult process. I won't say that that's easy. We've attempted on numerous occasions with some areas, and we're still pushing it. So yeah, it's a really tough issue. The good thing is we do have DLP in place. It's not, fully blown out, and it just isn't all that yet. But it is. We are implementing it, and it is working in some cases. So.
And just to go down that road slightly, and then I'll go to your question. I don't mean to be redundant here by any stretch of the imagination, but I would suggest you might already have tools in your security/availability portfolio that would allow you to work at the development and the implementation of policy. Rather than running a contrarian opinion, my thought is, again, anything I can do to eliminate the human element from the equation, And frankly, the DLP warnings are just one of those places where I can do that, where I give them some instruction along the way. If you can remove the decision-making processes from them by using things like policy, by using things like DLP, whatever it happens to be, you will be light years ahead. Yep.
So speaking philosophically, if we go to the internet, good sites can be bad, bad sites are bad, email can be good, it can be, so the sky is literally falling around us.
You have no idea.
Yeah, when you have a conversation with Mr. Symantec and you really get a sense of how bad it really is, what is the outlook, the landscape look like in 5 or 10 years when nothing is safe? Unless you're writing it down on a piece of paper or showing the person and lighting it on fire, that's your only safe means of transferring information. What do we do? Like, are we done?
Yes, we should all just give up and you know, a bunch of lemmings off the goings on. Okay, so let me speak philosophically for the security industry as a whole. We'll just kind of keep it there. All of us have taken these sort of forward looks. I can speak from Symantec specifically. We're already working on the issues to resolve my data mining requirements. I mean, we've seen that. We're going, okay, we need to run down the road. I don't need to, if you're involved with IT and you're involved with security, I don't need to tell you that security is an art form. It is not an exact science. We will never have it perfect. To use a baseball illustration, because we're in the middle of the NCLS and the Dodgers are still in it, and I'm such a huge Giant fan, I can't stand myself. You know, the security industry has to bat 1,000 and the bad guys only have to bat 1. And so again, I think it's a case of realizing what we're up against, realizing that there are some parameters, some things I drop dead have to have in place. And if I can stay at the bleeding edge, not best of breed, but best of need, what is it that I need to stand up to have all the things? Those are the kinds of questions that I would be asking. Let me just sort of run after moving to the cloud. It's a foregone conclusion you're going to go there. Sorry to tell you that. It's a foregone conclusion that you're going to go there because your data is growing at 62% year over year. So today, before you go there, there needs to be, if you will, an intelligent, clarifying conversation amongst your staff. What questions are we going to ask regarding security, regarding compliance? Is my data going to be commingled with everybody else and you're just going to put a marker on my stuff? Do you have separation of duty within your organization so that I know that no one person has access to all this stuff? What are you going to do with these disaster recovery, business continuity compliance that I have that you need to stand up to? Those kinds of things. I think it's more about forward think than it is anything else. And then hopefully over the course of time, with some confidence in your security provider, you will see, I don't have the time to do it. How do you deal with 1 million new virus definitions or 1 million new pieces of malware every day? We got that figured out too. So
I'd like to make a comment. I want to give you an analogy and an opinion. Analogies are never great fits, but sometimes they're good enough. So in 1924, we had something like 40,000 automobile deaths in this country. It was out of control. We had no consistent set of traffic laws, no consistent set of road safety, no requirements to be a safe driver, no requirements to have a safe car. And the Little Hoover Commission was formed. And they developed the first nationwide uniform set of traffic laws. Out of that, we started to realize maybe we should license drivers and see if they know something before they get on the road. Maybe we should start thinking about having safe cars. We're still in the early stages of what we do on the information highway. And we have not reached the point where we are willing to say that if you're going to be on this highway, there are things you're going to have to do. There are responsibilities you're going to have to take. The internet is not a right, it is a privilege. We do that on campus. We say that for our campus network. If you're going to use our campus resources, if you're going to use our campus network, we can take you off of it. We have the right to say whether you belong on the network and whether your behavior is justified. I would like to see us get to the point where we take steps that we do for going out on the highway on the internet. If I'm going to connect to my ISP and my computer is unsafe, why should the ISP let me on? It's going to be difficult to go down this road, but at some point, maybe I should prove that I'm competent to be using the information superhighway. There are things we can do, but we created the internet without any thought of safety or security. And now we're trying to make up for that.
Just blame Al Gore.
So that's a challenge.
If you come into a situation where I would rather have incompetent people on the internet instead of malicious people who are highly, highly competent. So it's a matter of what they're actually doing out there that is.
Well, should we allow ISPs to take more steps to protect us?
Is into their interest or not. And this is a really good, interesting conversation that can go on and on and on, but that's exactly, I think, where we're at. A challenge that I have specifically, this is self-centered, is there is technology out there that helps with a lot of these things. As a vendor or prospective vendor, getting the education across, and unfortunately salespeople have ruined it for other salespeople, it's very, very difficult to even share the message. So as people tend to say, if there is a better way to just get more educated, that would maybe be a start to actually, because there's solutions to this kind of stuff that is out there, it's cheap, cost and advantageous, but it's difficult to create a market.
I think that's one of the benefits to having this type of symposiums, right? With a whole bunch of government entities at all levels, because we can have those discussions. We're partners here. All you guys out there who work for some type of government agency, we're partners. And if we can share what we're doing to solve these issues, or how we think we're going to be addressing the issues, we can share that. That way, the whole state benefits. I think that's a really good point. We can't always, we don't always necessarily want to call a vendor for solutions, right? Because I don't want to get a sales pitch. Right? So if I have all of you as my cohorts, then I can, learn. And I think that's kind of one of the benefits of being here.
So I need to plead ignorance here. I thought we were done at 2:15. Are we done at 2:15 or 2:30? 2:30. Okay, good. I'm getting the word from the back. We're good at 2. So we got time for another question or two. Or we can quit with those people. No.
Christian, did you have something?
No, it's an answer.
Okay.
Yes? No?
2:15.
2:15? Yeah. We love you dearly. Go. Be warm and filled.